Everyone, welcome back. Simon Walker here. I'm delighted to have Jonas again with us. Hey Jonas, how are you doing?
Hey there, I'm good. What about you?
Good, thank you. Yes, absolutely. I'm very
Excellent.
excited to have a look at the motion tracking sessions you got set up for us. This is really good. So hi from Leon. Hi Leon. And you should be able to see my screen here. I'm just sharing the PDF about details what Jonas is going to be doing. So please let us know if, as we go on, if you can't see the screens or if you can't hear us, and you can type in those questions in the chat area. As I'm sure many of you are used to by now, because we've run a whole bunch of these. But also, I'm just going to put something else in the chat window. So just in case you haven't seen these, this is the PDF that we have been linking to that allows you to see what Jonas is going to be covering over these 3 days, and also to book on the other sessions. So if you haven't booked on them, please feel free to click on those timings, and everything with an underlined link in here just links to the registration page. And we're running Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday this week. So please feel free to join those. And I put in the download link for that PDF inside the chat window. And I'll remember to do other useful links as we progress. But the other thing, just to say quickly, is that if you want to contact us and let us know if you've got any follow-up questions about other sessions that you'd like, other topics for these sessions that you'd like us to run, please let us know. There's an email at the bottom of the PDF, training@maxon.com. It comes through to me, and then we can kind of make sure that we cover all the things that you want to know. Excellent. I think that's the fastest I've ever done the speech at the beginning.
Now we have to wait for one more minute.
Well, the other thing that these are inherent of the sorts of training sessions that we run for teams of people. So if you are working in a team and you've got a number of colleagues who are also using Cinema or all the Red Giant tools, please get in contact because we can run complimentary training sessions for your team as well. And that's that same info, that's at training@maxon.com. And oh yes, forgot to mention, we are recording this and you will be sent the recording link automatically at the end of the session. We're going to run for an hour, and then if you wanted to watch the recording of any of the previous sessions, I'll add those links to the chat window as well. So hi from Kent. Kent's always checking out the screen for us. Good to see you again, Kent. Thanks for that. Hi Logan. Hi Roel. That's right. Okay, I'm going to hand over to you now, Jonas.
Okay.
Just chuck it over to your screen. And here we are. Make you presenter.
Yeah. All right. Share my screen, and now you should see a nice little keynote. Does everyone see this?
Looks good from where I'm sitting.
Okay. Right. So, yeah, thanks again for introducing me, Simon. Yeah, my name is Jonas Pilz. I work for Maxon in the training department, and yeah, today and for the rest of the week, we are going to cover motion tracking workflows. And today I'm going to start with automated tracking. Tomorrow we will have a session about manual tracking and object tracking. And on Friday, we're going to cover scene reconstruction, which is also very exciting. So let's directly dive in so that we don't lose more than 5 minutes on the keynote here. What do we need motion tracking for? Actually, motion tracking is the key component when it comes to creating a connection between live action footage and any kind of visual effect. So there is 2D tracking and 3D tracking, and for 2D tracking, I have point tracking. This is what you can do with the After Effects tracker. And Aaron Rabinowitz had a tutorial lately where he tracked his hand, for example, and attached a null to it in order to emit some particles. That's the point tracking. Then we've got planar tracking, where you track a whole area or texture. This is what Kingpin Tracker is doing. And on the 3D tracking side, there is camera tracking. When you track the camera, when you solve the camera, that's what we're going to cover today. Then there is object tracking, pretty much the same as camera tracking, but instead of solving the camera, you solve an object. This can also be combined, also inside of Cinema 4D. And just for the sake of completeness, there's also motion capture, which is also some kind of 3D tracking. Yeah, today we're going to cover camera tracking. So what is camera tracking or 3D camera tracking? It's actually bringing the real world camera movement into 3D space. And that step is essential to add 3D to your scene, because you want the perspective to match. You want everything to match. That's why this process is also called match moving. And only if the 3D camera is in the same position in the end as the real camera, you can convincingly integrate 3D assets into film footage. That's what camera tracking is for. I want to start a little earlier, not just with the tracking, but I want to give you at least 2 tips before you shoot, because it's always good to keep some things in mind. And the first one is place markers. So that is not necessary, but can help you in certain situations. In this case here, we've got this floor or ground plane for the image frame here, which has a lot of structure. So here we don't need any markers because there's enough detail for the 2D tracking path to stick to. Well, there are enough patterns that it can follow. Other than here, because here on the white or gray areas there is not much detail to stick to. Maybe up here there's a little spot that is not a tracking marker, but I placed these little markers here just to help the tracker track the shot and in the end solve the shot. But also, as you place trackers, keep in mind that in the end you have to remove them in compositing. So you need to find a good balance between having, well, as many markers as you need, but not more than necessary, because this includes some extra work of painting them out. But by the way, Spot Clone Tracker is an amazing tool for painting such tracking markers out. The other thing is set documentation. It sounds boring, but it's also a very fast process. Just take measures, and you can take measures, of course, with the markers that you set, but you can also use these spots here on the, well, that's actually my kitchen table. You can use these spots and just measure them, and now you know from here to there it's 14 centimeters, and you could feed that information into the Cinema 4D motion tracker in order to scale the scene right in the end. And taking measures also includes the camera data, most importantly the focal length. That is actually, well, the only, or not the only, but the most important one. If you know your focal length, just write it down and use it later. Otherwise, the Cinema 4D motion tracker also does a pretty good job in finding out the focal length automatically. Good. When you've got your footage and you want to track the shot, there are, again, 2 things to watch out for. The first one is, especially for camera tracking, moving objects. The camera tracker gets distracted by moving objects. So you need to mask them out in advance. And in this case, it's very obvious. It's this guy. Don't forget to mask the shadow out as well. And another thing that might not be as obvious, but the lake here has got some moving structures, the waves. So it might be a good idea to mask that out as well. And the second thing to watch out for is lens distortion. And this is quite a significant one, especially when you use like professional lenses and wide angle lenses. You have got this bending of lines that should actually be straight, but they are curved. And this is because of lens distortion. Wide angle lenses and fisheye lenses are a pretty common thing that come with lens distortion. Good. How to get rid of that lens distortion? Here you see just the grid, and up here it's distorted, and every 3D motion tracker assumes that there is no lens distortion. This is how it can solve the shot best. So how can we get rid of the lens distortion? In Cinema 4D, there is the lens distortion tool that I will show you later. And inside of After Effects, there is no native solution for that, but we've got the lens distortion matcher, which was renamed with the latest release, I noticed. So yeah, I just updated today in the morning, and then I saw that it's not called just lens distortion anymore, but lens distortion matcher, and it is part of Red Giant VFX Suite 1.5. So it's pretty new, but it does an incredible job, and I will show you this in a minute. Good. So here is the 3D tracking process. It's, well, just a thing to quickly look at. You start with the footage, then you get rid of the lens distortion if you have any. Usually you have some, but if you shoot with an iPhone, for example, I do shoot a lot with my iPhone, it is pretty undistorted. So it has a very slight distortion towards the edges, but I usually don't get rid of that lens distortion. So this is an optional step. Masking is also an optional step, which you only need if you've got moving objects. But then there's the 2D tracking pass. So the tracker tries to find a pattern that it can follow. That's important to understand. The tracker does a 2D tracking first. It doesn't have any idea of the 3D information in the scene. This comes later when it calculates the parallax and so on and creates the 3D solve out of the 2D tracking. And after the 3D solve, you might want to align the scene so that the ground floor or that the ground plane fits to the ground floor and so on. Okay, enough information for now. Let's track some footage, and I will jump right into After Effects here. And here you can see this little shot that I prepared. And yeah, so it's this guy here jumping from that pedestal sculpture, whatever. And I thought, well, it might be a good idea to create an explosion in the background. So let's do this, and let's use 3D camera tracking for that inside of After Effects. So I will create a new comp out of the footage. So here you can see the footage, and you can also see that there is a logo in the top right. And at this time, we have to thank Red Bull for allowing us to use their footage. And yeah, this is the shot that I want to track. And first of all, I will shorten it a little bit. We need it until here. So let's bring down, or let's shorten the preview range and trim the comp to the work area. So here we go. That's what we want to track. But first of all, we want to get rid of the lens distortion. It's not that obvious, but if you have a look at the stand of this lamp here, you see that it is slightly curved. It's not that obvious, but it is there. So how can we get rid of this? And with the footage selected, I go to Effect, Red Giant VFX, and Lens Distortion Matcher. So this is a new effect, and it allows me to draw a line that should actually be straight, but I draw it in a curved way here on the stand. So I start here, then I create another point here, and then I go down and create another point here. If you want to move these points, you have to use this tool here. This is the move tool for the points. So let's do it like this. And that's pretty much everything you need to do. The rest is done by the plugin. Just one more tip, it is better to have less lines that are more accurate than having a bunch of lines that are not as accurate. And everything we need to do now is just to remove the distortion. So now the distortion is removed. Let me compare these two. So there's a little bit of lens distortion that has been removed now. And now,
a quick question for you, Jonas.
Yes.
There's a question from William. In terms of footage, camera shake really affects 2D tracking accuracy. So do you recommend shooting with a higher shutter speed if you're thinking of tracking?
It always depends. I would say yes. I think it's better to have a sharper image than having a lot of motion blur in the footage itself. Because motion blur is one of the things that can result in hard times when it comes to motion tracking. Yeah.
Yeah, but high frame rate as well is handy for that.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so we need something to, well, to work in that later applies or redistorts the footage. That's why we can also click this button here, create undistortion pre-comp. And now you see that the footage gets distorted again. And this is just the back plate here. So this is the original plate that you might want to work with, of course, because it's, yeah, it doesn't have the, well, undistorted, redistorted, and so on operations in it. We just open up this undistorted comp, and here we see that we've got yeah, the undistorted footage, and here inside of this comp we can add all of the elements that we want to add, and later in this comp it will be redistorted. So that's a pretty cool workflow. And as I told you before, once we got the lens distortion out of the way, we need to mask out stuff, and I will just mask out the Red Bull logo here for the tracking. So let's jump into the comp here, select the footage, and let's get rid, or let's deactivate the lens distortion matcher for now, because I just want to add a mask here, like so. And then we set it to be inverted, and then we reapply the effect here and jump out of that composition, because the mask will be distorted with the lens distortion effect. Okay, now let's say we are ready for tracking this shot. I made some tests, and it also, there is a moving object in there. It does a pretty good job doing the camera tracking here. And for doing the camera tracking, you can go to Effect, Perspective, 3D Camera Tracker, and now it starts analyzing the background. But what actually happens here, when I go back to the keynote and to this slide here, is this one here. Here, this is the 2D tracking path. So the tracker tries to find patterns that it can follow, and after that, it will immediately jump into the 3D solve. Let's have a look back at After Effects. It's still analyzing the background, which means it's doing the 2D tracking. And then you saw there was this short 3D solve overlay, and now we've got this. If we scrub the timeline, we've got this, and there are a lot of yeah, trackers here following the footage. So what we need to do now is we need to find 3 markers or 3 trackers that can represent the ground floor, and I would use these here. Just click once, then they are selected, and then you right click and create a solid. Well, first of all, set the ground plane and the origin, and after that we create a solid and a camera. And now you can see that we already got a 3D plane inside of the footage. Now, how can we make this, how can we normalize this scene? Because when we create a new solid now and make it a 3D layer, you see that it's down here and it might be not the right size. It's sometimes an adventure what comes out in terms of sizes here or in terms of scaling. So a good idea might be to normalize this whole shot. And to do that, I'm going to use a plugin. And this plugin is called Normalize Track. And we also got the link for downloading it. So this might be added to the chat. And here is the manual how to use it. And basically it says, take the floor or the ground solid, rename it to be ground or floor, both names work, then align it a little bit. And I'm gonna align it so that this line here is parallel or almost parallel to the street here, like so. And then select it and just hit this button, and then that's done. So if I create a new solid now and make it 3D and place it up here, you can see that the size is more reasonable. It's a little bit tilted here, but that's, I think, because of my settings. And now I'm going to place it a little bit more in the back. First of all, I'm going to adjust the anchor point so that it's not in the center, but at the bottom. I'm going to hit A for that. And then I go to the Y and just type in ×2. Because if you didn't know, all of these input fields here are able to calculate, which is quite awesome. It's the same thing in Cinema 4D, by the way. And then I hit T to bring up the opacity settings and bring it down to 50%. And now I can move that plane a little bit back. And one thing you can do with 3D planes, which is really handy, is make your life a lot easier when it comes to rotoscoping. So imagine I want to roto out this sculpture here. Let me do that quickly. And I mean really quickly. Just like so. I did it better in the other one, so we don't have to do that very accurate here. Then I'm going to set a keyframe. I'm going to go to the last frame, and here you see that there is some slight offset. So what I can do is just move these points to the places where they belong, like so, and so, and so. And then you can see when I scrub through the timeline that it's already kind of matching well. And this is going to be our mat for this part here, for this sculpture or pedestal or whatever you want to call it. So let's bring up the opacity back to 100%. And now let's just go to the project and maybe let's add some dark smoke here. And yeah, I'm going to make it a 3D layer. And I'm also going to bring up the anchor point. In this case, I just noticed that this morning that the footage is actually just 720, but doesn't matter for now. I'm just going to scale it up and place it somewhere here in the background, maybe aligned to the street level here, and maybe scale it up a little bit more. And once you did all of this, you can use the shape that we created here and set it to silhouette alpha, and this will stencil out the whole thing. So you have your mask immediately. Let's deactivate the ground floor and let's have a look at this comp, because now it is redistorted. You can see our mask is not that well working, but for preview purposes, it works. Now let's jump into the finished comp, because that's where I spend a little more time doing all of this. And I'm going to break down the whole thing. So here we've got the footage. Then I cleaned the guy out. Then I placed the smoke here in the back. Then I added the explosion. Then I added this sculpture here. And this is important for the step that I want to take next, because I want to comp this all together using super comp, because super comp is super awesome. And then I added the jumper back, and that was tedious work. And well, I didn't do a perfect job on rotoscoping out this guy, but I used the roto brush, this one here, which comes in very handy for those situations. And then there is another sculpture behind, which is this part here, the part here in the back. Okay, and then you can also see here that the rotoscoping job wasn't perfect, so there is some bright edge here. And now let's comp this all together using super comp, because we want to make it look like this in the end, which is much better. So let's get rid of this layer now. And the way to add super comp to your composition is to select all of the all of the layers that you want to have in SuperComp, and then apply the SuperComp effect. Maybe one more word about that. If you want to use SuperComp, everything that is 3D needs to be inside of a composition. So here in the smoke composition, for example, there's all of the smoke, including the 3D camera data. And that's the same for the explosion and for anything else that includes 3D. So we select everything, and then we right click and go to Effect, Red Giant VFX, and SuperComp. And this will bring up this neat little window, which is actually a compositing program inside of After Effects. And the cool thing about SuperComp and the powerful thing about SuperComp is that it is detecting, or well, it takes care of the layering, but it can also, for example, when you've got the explosion here in the background, it can create glow effects, for example, that go above this sculpture or above this jumper. So you're not that restricted to layers as if you would be inside of After Effects. I hope that made sense. So let me just deactivate the explosion, and let me see if we can color correct the smoke a little bit. And I'm gonna hit this plus button because this is how you can add effects. And then I go to color correction, and then there is this match to background, and it does just, well, a little bit of tinting here. There are cases where this is way more obvious, but I will leave it as is. Then I will bring back the explosion in, and now you will be able to see what SuperComp is capable of. First of all, I select the layer here, and I set the layer type from normal to additive. This will turn the fire into an additive layer. And with additive selected, I hit the plus and I go to presets. And in the presets, there is a section called pyrotechnics, and I can add the big fire preset. And once I do, you see that this added a lot. So what did it add? Actually, let me just deactivate all effects. So first of all, let me go to this spot here, and let's have a look at the logo up here. The first thing that was added is heat blur. And once I, I have to reactivate them here, enable effects. So I have to disable them separately here. So if I disable that here, you can see the logo. If I enable it, you cannot see it anymore. And this is because of the heat blur. So here you can see the little transition. This is the V of the logo. You see that? So we've got some heat blur in there. That is pretty cool. Then there is an effect that is called core matte, and this will basically make the core of the fire fully opaque. At least that's how I understood it. And then there is optical glow here, but it is a little different to the optical glow. Well, it is actually the same optical glow than in After Effects directly, but in this case, if I enable it, although the fire is in the background, it will glow above other elements, which is very cool. And now I can set it up. I can reduce the size here, for example, to 200 and make the highlights only 80%, for example, so that we get a little bit more detail here in the fire. Then I go to the sculpture. And here I'm gonna add some light wrap.
Quick question for you, Jonas. Just on the fire and the smoke, we just had a question from Logan about what did you use for those? Did you generate them, or is that stock footage?
No, that's stock footage. That's from Video Copilot, Action Essentials.
Excellent.
Yeah, and yeah, I'm gonna add the light wrap here. And that's the really cool thing about SuperComp. So right now you couldn't see it that much because the amount here is just 10%. But if I bring that up to 50%, you can see what happens. Here, you can see that it gets a red outline or an outline or a outline area that is close to the background. So it's a blurred version of the background, more or less. But here, in that window, you see that it helps a lot integrating the fire into the shot. And the same thing can be done with the jumper. Of course, with the jumper, we can do a few more things. Let me go to this frame, because here you can see the bright outline. So let me get rid of that first. We use an edge erode, and I want to bring the amount up to 100% and the size down to 1. And now you see that that this bright rim is gone. We can also add an edge blend, which will blur the edge a little bit. So we can also bring that up to 2, for example. Then you see that it is a little bit more blurry. And then we can add some haze, which will make the guy inherit a little bit of the color behind it, and also some light red. So let's bring this up to, let's say, 30%. And this way, well, look at this preview, how the guy looks. Here it looks completely unrealistic, but in here, it really makes a difference. So let me close that. And if I deactivate SuperComp, this is where we started, and this is where we are now, which looks way hotter, and the guy integrates much better. And yeah, so here you can see that he's not so yellowish, and once the explosion is behind him, he's very yellowish. So it integrates him a lot better. Okay, one more thing here in this comp, where we have the ground plane and so on. What if we want to use this tracking data inside of Cinema 4D? We need to bring it over. And we can do that by right-clicking into the composition, going to New Maxon Cinema 4D file. And this will create a new Cinema 4D file. We go in here and we call this 3D data and save it. And now we should have this. Oh, and it starts Cinema 4D Lite immediately, because this is linked to the shot. So now we've got a 3D scene without a camera. But of course, we need a 3D scene with a camera included. So what we can do, if we have the Cinema 4D layer selected, we can adjust the camera, not to be the Cinema 4D camera, but to be the comp camera. And now you see that it's floating up here, which is correct because of the fact that our ground plane, let me open up the position, is not at 0, 0, 0. And this is because of the normalization, so that if you create a new plane, that this is centered instead of here with one corner. Okay, but what we can do here now is we can merge the comp camera into Cinema 4D. So we click this, and now the After Effects camera has or was merged into the Cinema 4D project. So we hit OK, and we jump into Cinema 4D Lite in this case.
I've got a quick workflow question for you, Jonas, from Matt. Yeah. Just about wondering, his question is, could you achieve the same results using the native C4D tracking tool? And I was just going to add into that what your thoughts were about those two different processes and why you chose them in this particular occasion.
Well, that's a good question. For me, it highly depends on which application I use most for the post-production work. I also have cases where I track the shot inside of Cinema 4D plus in After Effects, because both trackers have their strengths, and the strength of the After Effects tracker, for example, is to create 2D planes that you can use for masking, for rotoscoping. And the strength of the Cinema 4D tracker is that you have way more control than you have got in the After Effects tracker, because the After Effects tracker is completely automated. You don't even have an option to filter out tracks and so on. That's stuff that you can all do inside of Cinema 4D. So yeah, that's it always depends. If it's well, if it's gonna be a quick project, I often use the After Effects camera tracker, but as soon as it needs to be really accurate, and of course, if I want to include 3D objects into the filmed footage, then I definitely use the Cinema 4D motion tracker.
That's a good answer. I mean, Max also followed up with whether or not the data sets could be combined. I mean, they are separate, but you've almost half covered that already because of the workflow of choosing one with something else in mind down the workflow.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so here we are in Cinema 4D Lite, and we are in the right Cinema 4D scene. It was opened up before I merged the camera, so now I have to go to revert to save project, and now the camera is here. That's the After Effects camera. And if I jump in here, you see that the pivot point is up here, and actually it needs to be down here somewhere. So what I'll do is I will create a null and make the camera a child of it. And then I go to its coordinates tab and copy over these values here from After Effects. So I will copy the Y, go back to Cinema 4D Lite, and bring it here to the Y. Now you see that the pivot is down here, but it needs to be there. And then I go back, copy that out, and go back to Cinema 4D Lite, type in minus, that's important. And here we go. That's the same camera movement now. So now we could actually create a cube, place it here, save the project, yes, then go back to After Effects. And now the problem is that we're still using the comp camera. We need to bring that back to the Cinema 4D camera, and then it is here in place. So that's how you would do that. Okay, now let me show you how to track stuff inside of Cinema 4D. And we will go to Cinema 4D S22. And I've got an empty scene here. And or other questions before we continue, because now we are in a different application.
No, I've been firing them as we've been going along. That's a nice nifty trick of bringing in the cube in, and I like the fact that you can do that in C4D Lite as well. So that's a nice little trick.
Yeah, good. So inside of Cinema 4D, you can access the tracker here in this menu, but you can also go to the motion tracker layout, and this will show you everything you need for tracking. And here, this window says double click to create motion tracker object. So I do that. Here is my motion tracker object. Then it says double click to select footage. So I do that. And I'm gonna select this wall footage here. And please note that this is an image sequence. And this is already the first tip that I can give you, and I will show you later why this is important. The first tip is, in Cinema 4D, always track image sequences, because sometimes you will introduce errors when you track video files. I will show you that later. For now, let's open the wall here. So this is the footage, and now we have got different options here that are related to the footage. Here you can see that the tabs represent the order that you should take. So first you set up your footage, then you go the 2D tracking path, then the 3D solve, and then, if necessary, the scene reconstruction. So in the footage path, I will resample the whole image to 50%, which means that we don't track the full resolution, but only half of it. So the dimensions are full HD, but they are downsampled to 960 by 540. And this is because of two reasons. First is speed, and the other one is that image noise or noise in the video can distract the tracker. so it's not as accurate, and you can also get rid of that. You can also track at 100% here. That's no problem. I pretty much always track with 50% here. So if you play this back, it's a little bit slower at the first time because it caches everything, but we actually also don't have to do that. We can go to the next tab here in the meantime. And, oh, maybe let me jump back one more time, because here you've got an input for a lens profile. And this would actually be the part where you get rid of the lens distortion if you had any. In this case, it's pretty straight, everything, pretty undistorted because I shot it with my iPhone. And now I go to 2D tracking, and everything you need to do is to auto track. Just click this button once, and then it will do its magic. Now it's in the 2D tracking phase, so it will search for things that it can stick to, and it's already finished, and it will follow them. So here we go. You can see that. Okay, now, and that's the cool thing, that's already an advantage over After Effects. You have the option to, for example, filter tracks out. By default, it filters tracks out that are shorter than 15 frames. And there's also a smart acceleration filter, which means that if you have many trackers going this direction, and then there's just one going this direction, it would be filtered out. Or if it's accelerating way slower or way faster than all of the others, it will be filtered out. But you can also,
sorry, Jonas, I've got a couple of quick questions whilst you're on this topic. Just quickly, Julian's asking about doing 3D tracking with an object tracker after doing the 2D solve. And his main question is, when do you do 3D solve versus object tracker versus the full solve button?
Well, actually, those are two different topics. And my answer would be I would first solve the camera and then track the object, if that's the right answer to the question. You can, of course, combine the automatic track and the manual tracking, also when it comes to solving the camera. But usually in my workflows, most of the time, I track automatically to solve the camera and then manually to solve the object. But this will be the topic completely for tomorrow's webinar, actually.
Got it. Excellent.
So I don't know if we should postpone that question more to tomorrow.
We'll save it up, and I'll ask it again.
Okay.
That. Yes.
Okay.
Julian said tomorrow for it, so thanks.
Yeah. So here you can start filtering more. So you can use the error threshold, for example. That's one that I use pretty often. And if we bring that down to, let's say, 10%, you see that we get rid of a lot of these trackers. So let me go to 15% maybe, and this just filters out a few more trackers. And now we could directly go into 3D Solve and solve the camera. But before we do so, I want to introduce you to something that is very important to debug the tracking, and that is the motion tracker graph view. So let me bring this up. What is this? This is a view that shows you all of the trackers that have been created. And it also shows you the quality of those trackers. Whenever something is green, the quality is good. When it turns reddish or red, the quality is not so good, and then it can be filtered out using the error threshold. If you zoom in, you can also see the tracking direction. So in this case, it was tracking bidirectional, backwards and forwards. And yeah, you can also see that some of the trackers didn't go from the very start to the very end, but they are starting here and just going to there and so on. But this is a very cool tool here to see where how the tracker is working. The yellow ones are always the keyframes. Those are the frames where the tracker has been created or where an additional keyframe has been set. The other thing that is here is really in the graph mode. Here we see the the error threshold, but we can also, oh, here we see the tracking error. So yeah, that can be quite handy sometimes. And you can also yeah, just move this bar here to move the error threshold filtering. And then we also can have a look at the 2D tracking speed. And once everything is yeah, almost the same here, it's fine. And then here, this is the tracking acceleration. So some of these are very important, especially this one, to find out if there are double frames. And this is exactly what I want to show you after this shot. But that was just a quick well, excursus to the graph view, just that you have seen it at least once. And now I'm going to go to 3D Solve. So what I just showed you is nothing you have to do, but it's always good to have a look at these. So then let's go to 3D Solve. And solve mode is full 3D reconstruction, and the focal length is unknown but constant. Let's keep that as is, and just hit Run 3D Solver. Down here in the lower left, you can see the progress, and it's running the 3D Solver. And right now it's comparing the movement of the 2D trackers, and based on the parallax, it will solve the camera then.
Jonas, are you going to be talking about creating a lens profile?
Yes.
Okay, because Philip's asked that question, and I was just waiting for the right moment to ask you. I thought you might be.
I will. Okay, now this solve has been finished, and sometimes we can see that if we scrub through the timeline, because then these little markers here appear outside of the footage. And now if we want to navigate the footage, you can see that we cannot orbit around. We can just, like 2D-ish, move this whole footage. And this is because we are actually in 2D mode. So the tracker automatically is set to work in 2D mode. So you can move the footage around because it's 2D. If we want to get back to 3D, just disable 2D mode. Now we are back in 3D space, so to speak, or in 3D navigation mode, and can also turn around and so on. So the camera, if we go back to frame 0, always starts at the center of the scene, at the pivot point, at the scene origin. And now we can see if we go here that, well, the track seems to be quite accurate. This is the ground floor and this is the wall. And now we need to align the whole thing. So let me have a look through the camera and let me reset this 2D view. And to do so, we go to footage, and in the navigation settings, we click full footage. Now we are back here, and maybe we can also bring down the brightness here a little bit to see those markers better. And then I zoom in, and let's say that we want to have this here as the scene origin. And to set this up, I'm going to create a position constraint. So I click here, and then I click here. So now this is the pivot of the scene, as you can see. Then I'm going to go to planar constraint, and the planar constraint needs 3 input objects. So I use this one, and that one, for example. So now we are already here. And the last thing I want to do is I want to set the x-axis for the shot, because we are rotated here. It should be parallel to this wall here. So what I do is I create a vector constraint, and now I have a look at 2 nulls that are pretty parallel. Let's say this one and this one. And I define this to be the x-axis. And now, as you can see, the scene is aligned and it looks pretty good. So let me define the length. Right now it's set to unknown, but from here to there, that might be 0.5 meters maybe. So let's set the length to known. I didn't measure it, but in this case, it would have been good to take measures. So I'm constantly victim of my own memory, because I always forget to take the measures. And in this case, it's not that critical, but sometimes, especially when you want to combine a camera and object tracking, it is essential. So this is looking quite good. Also, if we jump out of the camera and have a look here, you can see that this is looking quite good. So we've got the ground floor here, and we've got the back wall here. Now, how would you check if the track is really solid? Let me deactivate or make the auto features invisible, and then I go to the startup layout, and I will create a plane and make this plane 2 meters by 1 meter and move it a little bit forward, like so. And then I'm going to create a material. And in the material, I activate the alpha. And in the texture here, I go to surfaces, checkerboard, and I apply the checkerboard here. And now, if you play back the animation, you can see if your track is really solid, because you've got very small spots where the original texture, the original footage comes through. And I think this is really solid. So what I can do now is, for example, add a figure, make it a little bit smaller, like so, and play back the animation. And here we are. This is our automated tracking.
That's a nice trick with the checkerboard. That's really good visually for spotting any drifts as well. I've got another quick question for you. This is from Yang. There's a question about crop camera and full camera and those settings. Is there a recommendation, or do they make a difference when you're doing tracking?
You mean in After Effects, the comp camera?
Well, the crop camera and full camera do they affect the setting whilst you're tracking with that camera? I thought it was about the
After Effects or Cinema 4D right now, because I think in Cinema 4D there's no crop camera effect.
Okay, that's what I wanted to check with you. So if that's something I'd missed, perhaps Yang, you can verify the question or give us some more info.
Yeah, that would be nice. So let me quickly make an excursus to what I wanted to show you earlier. And this time I'm going to load the very same footage, but the MOV file instead of the image sequence. So I open this up and I bring down the scene length, and I also bring down the frame start or the frame stop here in the motion tracker. And now I just 2D track this very shortly to show you why it is not a good idea to track video files. Good. So if you play this back, you don't see any difference, and that's exactly the dangerous point, because what you don't see here is if there are any double frames or any skipped frames or so. So let me go back to the graph view. That's actually why I introduced the graph view to you earlier. By the way, here you can also see trackers with a high error threshold or with a high error value. And if we go to graph mode and have a look at the arrows, you see that it's pretty random almost everywhere. But here, there's a section where the error stays the very same. If we go to the tracking speed, you see that it's all up here, and then there's one frame where it goes down to 0. And what does a tracking speed of 0 for all trackers mean? That we're having a double frame. So let me go to frame 33, and let's double check this. So here's frame 32. We've got movement to 33, and here between 33 and 34, there is no movement. That's a double frame. I'm not sure exactly why this happens. I think it is because Cinema 4D just accepts integer frame rates, like full 25 or 30, but there is no thing like 29 point whatever. I think it comes from this, but I'm not exactly sure. But the most important thing is that I know how to work around this, and this is importing your footage into After Effects, making an image sequence out of it, and then do the tracking inside of Cinema 4D using the image sequence instead of the movie file. That's important to know.
That's a nice workaround. Sometimes these cameras, especially phone cameras, have multiple frame rates or variable frame rates as they're shooting, of course.
Yeah, and they are not always the same. So if I shoot something and I import it into After Effects, I realized slight differences, like nuances in the frame rates, and that's dangerous. Okay, let me show you the lens distortion workflow now. So lens distortion inside of Cinema 4D is a little bit different than in After Effects using the lens distortion matcher. Here we go to Render, Lens Distortion, and this will bring us up this tool. And this tool asks for an image. So you cannot load in a video file. You have to load in an image. So let me go to this one, and you might know this footage because it's from the Red Giant lens distortion demo. And once the image is loaded, we go to lens distortion, and here the workflow is pretty much the same. So we add a line, and I will do that here. So let's use this line, and I will place this point of the line here. Then I will place this line of the point somewhere here, and this one back here. And now you can already see the interpolation is linear. So we have to hold down Control or Command on Mac and make this a little bit rounder, like so. And same thing here. Let's get a little bit closer to the line, something like this. Okay, then you need to choose from a lens distortion model, and I'm going to use the standard classic and auto solve the whole thing. So let's do this, and this is the undistorted shot. Actually, I see that the offset here is quite big, so maybe I go back. Let me do this again, because it is not very accurate. I had better results in my tests. So let me do this. Something like that. And now let's again go to standard classic. And it's, well, I think it's a little bit better. You can see that these lines are a little bit straighter. And then the workflow from here would be to save that lens profile. So we do that. And maybe let's go one up here, and let's call this webinar 1. Save this lens distortion profile, and now we've got a lens distortion profile file. And,
excellent. One quick question, Jonas. How did you get to that lens distortion tab again?
So it's in the render settings, there is the lens distortion tool, and then the lens distortion tool comes with 2 tabs. Here is where you load in the image, and here is where you solve the lens distortion. And if you have a look here, this is the file that has been created. And now with that, I can first of all leave that that tool, and then I go to the motion tracker, layout, double click to select, to create the motion tracker, double click to select the footage. And then I'm going to lens distortion footage, and I'm gonna load in this thing here. Go to the footage tab, and in here I can load the lens distortion profile that I just created. So I click this button, go to webinar 1 lens, LNS is the suffix, and here we go. That's our undistorted footage. Let me bring up the resampling and play back the thing once.
Nice. I noticed you're using a JPEG sequence there. We had a question about JPEG versus OpenEXR sequences for tracking. Have you found there's much of a difference between those?
Well, I didn't use OpenEXR, but I do a lot of tracking demos. And the problem, I used TIFF before, and every single TIFF was 6 megabyte. And every single JPEG is just half a megabyte. So I'm just doing this to save space. I would usually go with some format that can have a high compression that you don't see. And I think JPEG with like 90% quality is fine for tracking, because you don't get those artifacts that the tracker could stick to.
Got it.
Yeah.
There's, by the way, a quick comment on the LNS file that you created. We were asked a while ago about being able to share data from Cinema to the lens distortion matcher in the VFX suite. So I'm anticipating a question of, can we do that? And the answer is, that's a feature request that we're working on. So not currently, but we're looking at it.
Yeah, but I was thinking about that also. And actually that feature request was one of mine. So my workflow, or one possible workflow, could be that you jump into After Effects, undistort the footage there, then render out the undistorted footage, track this inside of Cinema 4D, and then render everything out inside of Cinema 4D, and then get back to After Effects and redistort it there. This could be a workflow, but actually there is a faster one. The optimal workflow would be that both understand the same file format. But we have to go on here because I have a few things to cover. And
well, we've only got a handful of minutes left, because we need to we're running another webinar on this system for somebody else shortly. So this is your warning to wrap it up within a few mins, if possible, please, Jonas.
Okay, will do. Okay, let's, we are in automatic tracking. One thing that I want to show you here is not just hitting auto track, but using this button here, create auto tracks, because this will create auto tracks first. They don't track, they are just created. Now, if I delete them and adjust the minimum spacing here to be 1, for example, and create another set of auto tracks, you see that they are sticking way closer together. So this is the distance, the minimum spacing distance in pixels for the auto trackers. But keep in mind that these are using the resampled or the downsampled resolution here. That's important to know. Okay, then let's track forward here. Let's scrub through the timeline, and here we see that we lose trackers over time. So we can set another set of auto tracks back here, track backwards, and now this is looking quite good, but we could also set another set of auto trackers and track bidirectional here using this button. And yeah, then we could solve the whole thing, and I will really run through that as fast as Cinema 4D can do. When is the next session, Simon, on the system? Is it past, or do you know?
Sorry, I was on mute. We're setting up shortly after 10 past, so we need to wrap up by about 8 or 9 minutes past.
Okay, will do. Good. The solve is finished. Let me let me have a look, and we'll jump out here and scrub through the footage here. That seems to be good. So let me do the very same thing as before, create a point constraint here in the middle. Then let's create a planar constraint for some of these here to align the shot a little better. And then a vector constraint along this line here that will define the z-axis like so. And let's say we know the length, and the length is gonna be 5 meters. And now we've got the tracked shot here, and the focal length also seems to be quite good because the grid clearly matches the vanishing lines here. That's very good. And now I'm also going to create this material that I created before with the checkerboard in the alpha. Create a plane, make it bigger, and let's see if the track is solid. Yeah, it looks quite good. Well, perfect, because now we can place objects in here. So we can skip that because of the time. If I render this now, maybe let me create a background object. This is also one thing that you can do directly inside of the motion tracker object. Go to footage and create a background object. So here we go, that's our background object. You can see that we now have got the lens distortion back because the background doesn't support it by default. There are multiple places where you could add lens distortion. You could, for example, in the textures here, go to Effects, Lens Distortion, and there you could use the lens profile again to distort textures. And the other thing is, if I render this now to the picture viewer, you can see that this is not distorted. So to finish up the motion tracker or the lens distortion workflow, let me open up the render settings. And in the effects, there's also one that is called lens distortion. So what we do is we click this button here, choose the very same lens distortion profile that we used before. And if we hit render now, you can see that it takes a little bit longer because it has to bring in the distortion, but you can clearly see that we are rendering a distorted output, so to speak. And that is actually almost everything that I wanted to show you, but I took the shortcuts here in the end. So let me quickly jump back into the keynote to remind you of tomorrow's webinar that will focus on manual and object tracking. And this is a combined track, what you see here, and I will break down this one. And also, if you didn't do, you can still register for Friday's webinar, where we will take a look at scene reconstruction and also breaking down this project. So if you're interested in all of that, that would be cool. I would be happy to see you there. And for now, I'm going to make you, Simon, the presenter again. Did that work? Yes. You're muted.
Fantastic, thank you. It's like speed training, this.
Yeah,
I don't know how you managed to cram so much in.
And I promise, when I rehearsed that, I even made it in 50 minutes. So
it's my fault as well. We keep wanting to ask you about extra things about your
no,
techniques.
It's okay. I think you all got the point. And I mean, there is a lot of doing little stuff here and there, but the most important information was there to track and solve a shot and yeah, for you to
Absolutely.
be ready to track something. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again for all of this. If anyone wants to watch this session again, Jonas is running it in a couple of hours' time. It's a repeat session. It's also live, so that if you wanted to come back, then you're most welcome. You'll get the recording to this automatically via email. And if you download that PDF that we shared, which you also get via email, that PDF link, then you can book onto the sessions for tomorrow and also on Friday to cover that really fascinating looking music room that you've set up. That looks really interesting.
Yeah, it was a fun project.
Absolutely, yes. And as a couple of people say, even your namesake Jonas in the chat, can we make the next one 10 hours, please?
That's good. I like that.
Absolutely.
I like
Great.
it.
And people saying thank you for letting us interrupt you as well with the questions, because that's
yeah,
also
no worries,
very
no worries.
illuminating.
That's why we're doing this live. Otherwise, I could just record a tutorial, right?
Yes, that's the point. Absolutely. And if you
Yeah.
do have further questions or you're watching this as a recording, please let us know, training@maxon.net, and then we can answer those questions for you directly too. Fantastic. Yes. Thank you again, Jonas. Really appreciate it. And thank you everyone for joining us too.
Yeah, thanks for joining, and hopefully see you maybe later, but hopefully tomorrow, the latest.
Tomorrow, yes. Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Right. Thank you. See you again. Bye-bye.
See you. Bye.